Today, I wanted to take the time to go over what I believe to be one of the strongest solo player builds focused on mapping in Path of Exile 2 Dawn of the Hunt. This build also works for Simulacrum as well as Breachstones, but I would not take this build into the Trials. I also would not take this build into places such as the Audience. I believe that this is the strongest solo player build because you're able to relatively easily on a budget acquire significant amounts of rarity as well as damage. With that being said, this build does have sort of a high entry point cost of around 100 divines to get the build online and going. This is not the only variation of the build. It is not the most expensive and it is not the most effective. But with that being said, I still wanted to share this information. I am able to run tier 17 150 daily maps with this setup, and we are on average able to acquire between 10 chaos to several divines as well as multiple tier 0 uniques per map with this setup. So I'm going to be going over the mapping setup, the actual character setup, as well as why and how it works. Now, for this build, we are playing as a Ritualist. The reason that we're playing as a Ritualist is because we get access to a third ring slot, which is very important when stacking rarity. It's an additional 50% rarity, and this also interacts with our passive Ascendancy, where we get 25% increased bonuses gained from equipped rings and amulets. So we're just gaining 25% additional rarity, which is what? It's about 12.5% additional rarity from the rings. And yeah, it's a very, very strong, very effective rarity setup, especially on a budget. You are still able to clear pretty much any and all content. As you can see here, we have very budget rings. I paid 1 divine for all of these rings. This one is maybe a little bit questionable that I only paid 1 divine for it, as it does have 4 valid tier 1 modifiers. But these other 2 rings that I bought, I paid 1 divine for. And yeah, the build is a Lightning Spear build, so if you are not a big fan of Lightning Spear, I do apologize. However, it is very effective. We are sitting at around 100k Lightning Spear DPS with rings that have no damage on them. And if we swap to rings that do have damage, we can get significantly more Lightning Spear damage. On the high end of the build, you can expect around 300,000 Lightning Spear DPS, as well as around 600k Primal Strikes DPS. This is without being affected by an Aura bot or, you know, any sort of buff in the game. And yeah, just to get into the build as a whole, I will go over all the gear to begin with. We are using a Regalia for this build, and the reason why we're using a Regalia is because it allows us to grab rings and other gear on a significant budget. Now, if you wanted to spend a lot more on this build, you could definitely swap out of a Regalia. You could get a lot more survivability running something like a Sleek Jacket. For example, I have this tier 2, tier 1 Sleek Jacket right here with 1500 evasion and 550 energy shield. This would be a very good alternative for a piece of body armor as opposed to using a Regalia. However, you would need to invest a lot more currency into better rings, better boots, and a better helmet, several hundred divines extra, if not thousands. The Regalia provides us 50% chaos resistance, 35% all res, and +5 all attributes. Now, one thing I will mention is that because our survivability is lacking a little bit on this build, I did go ahead and socket the Regalia with armor, evasion, and energy shield. This is actually really important because Regalias have very low base evasion and energy shield ratings, just something to consider and keep in mind. Because we're running Ritualist with triple rarity rings, we're also using Ingenuity just to gain the extra bonuses from 2 of the rings. So this will be 30% additional of 50% rarity on 2 rings, which is actually pretty significant. That is an additional 30% rarity across both rings. So in total with this build, we are able to achieve, as I said, around 300% rarity, which, you know, is the centerpiece of this build. For our rings, we do use double rarity rings for mapping. Like I said, the damage on the rings does not matter. This build functions around Astra Menace as well as Hand of Wisdom in action. We are attribute stacking to maximize Lightning Spear damage while running very budget rings. If you wanted to increase your damage, you could get rings with more damage on them, such as double tier 1 damage rolls with double rarity. You could also run triple damage rolls with less rarity on the rings as a whole, although I probably wouldn't recommend it for mapping and solo play. You'll see a lot more drops if you run more rarity. The original iteration of this build that I ran did run with around 150% rarity. However, after upgrading to around 300% rarity, I see twice, if not 4 times as much currency per map. I'm able to easily acquire 1 divine per map, relatively reliable. reliably. However, I will say that the investment is pretty high for mapping, as I do run triple deli, isolation, which are currently 4 for 1 divine, so it doesn't really pay itself off 100%, but we do see a lot of tier 0 uniques, and the main chase with this build is definitely mirrors, or additionally, you know, very expensive talismans or charms, such as these rite of passages with Spirit of the Cat. So like I said, we'll be going into the mapping setup as a whole eventually, but the primary damage from this build comes from Hawa. You definitely want a 1 to 12 Hawa. You can get these with low dex and intelligence rolls for just a couple divine, 2 or 3 divine. You can get an Ascendancy. You ideally want to allocate this with pure power, just to increase your damage, because we're not really pathing that way on the passive tree. But yeah, ideally allocate this with pure power. You can get an Ascendancy on a budget for maybe 20 or 30 divines. And then additionally, the regalia here, these go for around 60-ish divines, maybe more, maybe less. Yours doesn't have to be as good as mine. Mine isn't even perfect. It could have more armor, evasion, and energy shield. It could also have more attributes. But because we are attribute stacking, we definitely want all attributes on the regalia. There's a couple reasons for that, which I'll get into later. We also want chaos res just for the free 50%, and then the 35% all res. Like I said, this is going to make the rest of your build significantly cheaper to build out, because instead of looking for 400 ES, 500 ES boots, or 400 ES boots with chaos res, which could cost, you know, 500 divines, we pretty much get all of our chaos res for the entire build from the regalia. We only need to socket maybe one chaos res jewel, and we are perfectly fine and good to go. Because we're running lightning spear, we are using a tangle tongue. This is one of the builds where I would recommend a tangle tongue with an overcorruption on the critical hit chance, as opposed to a double socket, as well as additional fizz damage on the tangle tongue. Additional fizz damage will just give you more damage, so you ideally want the fizz damage to be overcorrupted. Mine is overcorrupted to 38 on the high end and 19 on the low end. And the intelligence doesn't matter that much, but ideally you want as much intelligence as possible, as we are using pure power. We also run a Sacred Flame. The main reason for the Sacred Flame is just the extra fire damage. You can use an unset ring to gain Herald of Ash and gain massively increased AoE fire damage. And yeah, we also have the resistance modifier on the Sacred Flame. The other big reason that we run a Sacred Flame is for the 10% increased spirit. Pretty important. Or not the 10% spirit, the 100 spirit is pretty important. On a budget, you could definitely get a worse Sacred Flame for just a couple divines. For our helmet here, we're just looking for a helmet with as much ES and rarity as possible. The other modifiers don't really matter as long as you are worked towards your res cap. So res cap on this build is the #1 importance, right? But you want to maximize your ES on your boots and your helmet, and I'll show you guys how to do that in the passive tree. As you can see here, we have around 4,500 ES. If I put this other pair of boots on, we have 5,000. This was the original pair of boots I used for this build. It just gives us res cap, and it has as much ES as possible. You can find a similar pair of boots to this for only a couple divines with less movement speed, 30%, 25% movement speed. You really don't need 55% movement speed, which is what these boots have, because more often than not, the faster that you move through a map, the more stuff you're getting hit by. And sometimes if you're running a very juice map, it's a little bit better to go slower than it is faster. And the loot will speak for itself, and it'll be a lot less rippy along the way. So again, we're running triple rings with rarity, double rarity. You can also run damage rings if you would like at the cost of rarity. You can get better rings than this for more currency. You could spend, 100 divines and get double damage, double rarity. Suffixes don't really matter. You want attributes and resistances, preferably attributes, but like I said, you also want to be res capped along the way. And in order of importance, attributes are definitely intelligence, strength, and then dex. Intelligence will give you more damage, strength will give you more ES, and dex will give you a little bit of, accuracy and whatnot along the way. But yeah, this is the build as a whole. We run 3 charms. We run Sanguis Heroum Staunching Charm. You can use any Staunching Charm. The main thing is that we just want an anti-bleed charm, because we are running Eternal Youth, so we have no life regen. So anything that causes us to bleed, such as poison or bleed, is just going to massively impact us. So we definitely want an anti-bleed charm. We also run a stone charm just to prevent getting stunned. I have one here with guard during effect, which is very, very nice, as well as chance to gain a charge when you kill an enemy. That modifier is a bit useless, which I'll get into later, because we are running the Ascendancy that gives us pretty much infinite charm charges. And then your last charm, I would really recommend a Thawing Charm. But if you really want to ball out and go all in, you can get a Rite of Passage, you can get a Golden Charm. Golden Charm will give you a bit more rarity. Rite of Passage will give you a lot of buffs for significantly faster clear, as well as movement speed throughout the map. Skill speed, this one in particular gives us crit chance, so we become crit capped with it active. We're dealing double damage with all of our crits, and we also gain some evasion rating, which is very nice. In terms of stats for this build, as you can see, I'm sitting at around 60% evasion, 5,000 ES with this pair of boots on, as well as 15% armor, so 15% physical damage reduction. We are res capped. If I put on a different ring, these rings as is are a little bit budget. Like I said, we only paid around 1 divine for them. So that's the gear setup. I will get into the talent tree real quick. For the Ascendancy itself, we're going into Mystic Attunement to gain equipped bonuses from rings and amulets, 25%, as well as an additional ring slot and some percent increased attributes because, as I said, we are attribute stacking. Some people really like to run Blood Boil, I believe it is, whichever one of these modifiers allows you to Ritual Sacrifice. A lot of people like to run Ritual Sacrifice, which is basically a free headhunter. You just use this whenever you want, and you are chilling. However, I don't really like Ritual Sacrifice. I mean, you can run a Headhunter on this build if you really want to at the cost of some rarity and some damage, as well as some resistances. I personally prefer Ingenuity. You can get an Ingenuity corrupted with resistances for really, really cheap to help res cap yourself as well. Like a 29/29 with, a low resistance roll is relatively cheap. But I prefer to go into Mind Phylacteries. Unfortunately, Intricate Sigils is actually pretty useless. You don't really gain any value out of this unless you just go for a 2-charm utility belt, which is definitely an option to save some money. I have a 3-charm here, but you could get a 2-charm and benefit from Intricate Sigils. Otherwise, it's kind of wasted. The main point here is Mind Phylacteries, which is using 25% of your mana to trigger charms with insufficient charges. This is actually very valuable when mapping. You can basically keep 100% uptime on all of your charms that are out of charges, as well as never have to worry about running out of charges on a stone charm or a thawing charm or a staunching charm and accidentally dying as a result. So just something to keep in mind. I will point out here that I do have a Melting Maelstrom Ultimate Mana Flask, but what I will say is that this flask is absolutely horrible. I would not recommend using it. I would also not recommend using Olros Resolve. I would look for a life flask with increased charges and increased amount recovered. Because you're using Ingenuity, if you are using Ingenuity, you can just spam this life flask at worst case scenario to regen life. As you can see here, every use gives us 20% use. Because it restores 1800 life, it's basically like 40% of an Olros Resolve anyways. The problem with Olros Resolve is it just doesn't have enough charges. So I have multiple of these. I don't use them because, as you can see here, it consumes 21 of 75 charges on use, which means we only get 3 uses out of this flask, or an effective amount of around 3,300 life. However, with this flask here, I get around 12 uses and it recovers 1,800 life. So even if I spam this flask, I'm getting more value than an Olros Resolve. And if I don't spam use it, I get some very nice passive ES regeneration throughout a map. 1,800 life times 12 is what? It's like 20,000 life effectively. So this flask is almost 10 times more effective than Olros Resolve as a whole. Just something to keep in mind as you build out this character. If you want to build out this character, I would really recommend mana flasks and life flasks that have charges and amount recovered over the unique flasks. Both of the unique flasks are pretty bad. I've always thought Olros Resolve was really bad. It's definitely very nice if you get into a tight situation, but because we have 5,000 ES, I mean, if we take 100% of our ES, we can literally use this 3 times. It only regenerates like, what, 3/4 of our ES, and then we basically die after that. If we can't kill everything or gain our flash charges back, we might have to go back to our hideout to regen our charges. Just something to keep in mind. But going back to the passive tree as a whole, like I said, we're attribute stacking, so we are pathing down towards Jack of all trades in the passive tree. This will give us 2% increased damage per 5 of your lowest attribute. This is why I said you definitely want some attributes on your rings if possible, because the more attributes as a whole, the more damage you're going to be dealing. The more intelligence you have, the more damage you're going to be dealing through pure power. We take Polymathy for 7% increased attributes, as well as just some of these other nodes over here for increased attributes. Going up over here, we do allocate Mind over Matter, just for some extra lightning and elemental damage up here in the passive tree. 40% increased LE damage if we've dealt a critical hit recently, as well as 5% all res and 30% increased elemental damage. These are very, very effective nodes. However, there definitely are better or different nodes that you could choose along the way. You could go into crit or crit damage nodes. You could go over here into Deadly Force for increased damage if we've dealt a critical hit in the past 8 seconds, as well as some critical hit chance. Just something to keep in mind. I haven't actually went here to Tainted Strike yet, but Tainted Strike is a very valuable node. Magnitude of non-damaging elements. Part of this build works on shock and shock magnitude, and so increasing the magnitude of shock will be very, very effective and nice. I have not pathed there yet. It will be the next couple levels that I acquire. We do come down here into Javelin for some crit damage bonus and crit chance with spears, as we are running Tangle Tongue. And if we come up here, we are just kind of doing the same thing that we would normally do in a crit build, such as with the Bleed Mage build, which is we're grabbing some crit damage bonus, some crit chance, some LE damage, as well as 5% of physical damage taken as random element damage. This is just going to help us with survivability as a whole, because we'll essentially be taking 5% less fizz through 75% LE res reduction. I do come down to Coming Calamity, and I take Coming Calamity, but I do believe that this is not that good. Even though we are affected by Herald of Ash and Herald of Thunder with this specific setup, I still probably don't think that Coming Calamity is the best. You might be able to allocate these points maybe into either Tainted Strikes or also up here into Deadly Force. Just something to consider. We come up here on the passive tree. We take Stuck Through, Heart Stopping, Heartbreaking. And we are going to put a Time Lost here with 3% increased intelligence. If you want to get one with some extra damage on it as well, it definitely won't hurt. So this one has 4% of damage as extra fire damage. Now, this isn't actually game-changing damage. It does show up as 10% damage, but most of that is from the int because we're losing like 10% of our int. The actual value of the gains damage modifier isn't that high. You could also probably put a pretty decent Time Lost here and just a regular Time Lost Emerald or a Sapphire and gain a lot of value out of these nodes as well. So this probably isn't the best Time Lost setup. We come up here, we take Throat Seeker for massively increased critical damage bonus at the cost of some crit chance. Again, because we're running Tangle Tongue, we're going to be critically hitting pretty much every single attack, so it's very, very important that we maximize our critical damage bonus. One thing I get asked very frequently is how do I maximize my damage on a build? And it really depends on what your build is centered around. If your build is centered around dealing critical hits and magnitudes of, different effects in the game, then you definitely want as much critical damage bonus as possible, but you don't want to put all of your points into critical damage bonus. You definitely want to put some into LE damage, lightning damage, fizz damage, because there gets to be a point where if you're just increasing your fizz damage or your crit damage, you get less in return than if you were to take LE damage. So let's say you had 400% crit damage bonus, but no LE or lightning damage modifiers on your build, and then all of a sudden it would take 800 crit damage bonus essentially to gain the same value or effect as just having 100% LE or lightning damage, right? And it's a lot easier to get 100% LE or lightning damage than it is to get significant amounts of crit damage bonus, 400% for example. Now this is the big game changer for this build as a whole. Because we are using Grand Regalia and just an ES helmet and a pair of ES boots, you're going to notice that without this Heroic Tragedy here, I actually only have about 3,000 ES. So this Heroic Tragedy, this is a Verana Heroic Tragedy. We put it here next to Chaos Inoculation, and this converts Chaos Inoculation into Black Scythe Training, which causes us to gain 1% increased energy shield per 2 strength. Because we are attribute stacking and we have around 300 strength, this translates into about 300 or 150% increased energy shield. If you do happen to get a Heroic Tragedy with around 5,100 Songworthy Deeds, I will also convert this node up here into % increased lightning damage. So this is a valuable node as well as some additional strength to take. These nodes right here, these stun threshold nodes, are very, very important. If you don't take these, you will find yourself dying very frequently, or at the very least getting stunned very frequently, which is very frustrating, especially when mapping quite a bit. We come up here and we take Patient Barrier for 60% increased max ES. The slower start of energy shield recharge does not matter because we are running Eternal Youth. We also take Ingenuity. Quick note, you could probably remove Ingenuity and put it just into any other valuable damage node, as 25 int isn't necessarily game breaking. it does give us around 4% increased lightning damage, but because we have so much int and we're stacking so much percent lightning damage, it's one of those things, like I said, where you might find value going into a different node than you would normally just gaining more lightning damage, right? If I could gain 15% more fizz, it'd be a lot more effective than 15% more lightning, because we already have so much percent lightning damage in our build as a whole. We come down here in the passive tree, we do take Eternal Youth, and we do take Spectral Ward. Spectral Ward is very nice, as we are going to be gaining additional ES through the evasion on our Regalia. Regalia has 707 evasion with this current setup, 4 armor evasion and energy shield sockets, as well as 280% increased. So 707 divided by 12 is, you know, it's like 70, 80 extra ES, but you have to factor in that we also have, you know, 150%, 210% increased ES, so this is actually like 500 ES. It's pretty significant. These nodes right here are just going to give us a bit more percent ES and max energy shield as well. We're taking Eternal Youth because energy shield builds this league just feel really bad with Grim Feast being removed from the game. So we take Eternal Youth and we rely on Life Flask to restore our energy shield. This just allows us to map a lot quicker and complete maps a lot quicker because we don't have to AFK or wait for energy shield to recharge. This being a thing is part of why I play so much Blood Mage and Bleed Mage, as well as the Temporalis build, is because Blood Mage has inherent life regeneration through Life Remnants, and no other class really has that. So Eternal Youth is very, very nice because we are essentially just always chilling with it, right? We can just spam Life Flask. It's not as effective or as good as Grim Feast, but it still works. We are coming up into For the Jugular and True Strike just to gain some crit damage bonus as well as some crit chance. And there are some other notable nodes right here, such as Immaterial, which, because we have Eternal Youth and we're basically spamming Life Flask, we'll have massively increased evasion, as well as massively increased evasion through Energy Shield. Getting as much evasion on this build as possible is definitely really important just to maximize survivability. You're going to struggle a lot if you only have Energy Shield, right? So evasion is important too, which is why I said if you do have a lot of currency and you really want to ball out on a massive budget for this build, you could definitely drop the Regalia, go into a high evasion ES chest piece, as well as significantly better rings, boots, helmet, all around the board. Just something to consider. We also take Subterfuge Mask, which is really important for us to have a really high energy shield helmet. So if I take off this helmet, you'll see I actually lose 22% evasion. So Subterfuge Mask is really, really important. Really, really important to have a high ES helmet and to take Subterfuge Mask just for the extra evasion. From this helmet alone, we're getting almost over 1,000 evasion without any of the existing modifiers on the tree as a whole. So this is the passive tree. Very simple, very straightforward. Just a regular, pretty standard attribute stacking passive tree where we do utilize the Varana to acquire Blackside Training. And because we're stacking attributes, we're able to massively increase our energy shield for the build as a whole, which makes this build very effective for Delhi maps, as well as stuff like Breachstones, etc. Breachstones don't really matter. You can run pretty much any build with Breachstones. What I will say is that the boss damage on this build is sort of lacking, right? It's really the one thing that this build struggles with. There are optimizations for this build. You can run Stormlance, as one of my viewers, Daniel, has pointed out to me. Daniel has a Stormlance variation of this build that is a lot more effective for bossing and killing pinnacle content than it is necessarily this variation of the build. But this variation of the build is relatively budget friendly and pretty effective as a whole. Now for the rest of our jewels, we are just looking for crit chance, crit damage bonus, damage with spears, proj damage, pretty much any damage modifiers. This is a jewel that I crafted myself. You can also look for max ES on a jewel, but keep in mind that we already have really high percent increased ES through Patient Barrier and through Blackside Training, so you're not going to gain as much value through percent ES than you would normally on most other builds that have just high ES through gear. Just something to keep in mind. As you can see right here, I have a 20% max ES jewel. If we take this out, and this is a very budget jewel, this is like a 5 chaos, 1 chaos jewel. But if we were to take this out, as you can see, I only lose 200 ES, so it's not massive, it's not game breaking or game changing, but you definitely probably still want some percent max ES on some of your jewels. I was mainly just trying this one out. Percent ES is probably a little bit better. And like I said, for our amulet, we do anoint pure power because we are stacking int and attributes as a whole. As you can see, I have 800 int. So if we do the math on pure power, that is around 20. It's like 180% increased lightning damage, 160%. So it's definitely very effective for lightning spear as a whole. If I were to take off the Astral Menace, as you can see, my lightning spear damage, well, I actually can't even use it anymore, but it probably goes down to around 20,000, so it's a significant difference. Looking at our skills, we're actually running Primal Strikes. As I said, there are variations of this build that just rely on Stormlance instead of Primal Strikes. Primal Strikes is very rippy. You're going to die a lot using this ability because you have to stand in melee range to use it, which means you're going to get hit by a lot more mechanics. But this is our main boss killer, and the rotation for Primal Strikes is relatively simple. We're going to shock the target with Lightning Spear, Barrage, and Stormlance, as well as debuff it with Conductivity, and then we are going to essentially press Primal Strikes 3 times. As you can see, in order for Primal Strikes to gain maximum effectiveness, the target has to be shocked. Primal Strikes can actually deal several million damage in one-shot bosses if you have enough damage on your build as a whole. We are supporting Primal Strikes with Primal Armament for more damage, Concentrated Effect, Close Combat, Overextend, as well as Elemental Focus. And as you can see, my Primal Strikes DPS is 200k, but this is on the very, very low end of this build. This is not a lot of Primal Strikes DPS. If you look on PoE Ninja, there are variations of this build that have 600,000 Primal Strikes damage, which is enough to one-shot pretty much all of the Pinnacle content. It's just not as clean or effective as something like a Bleed Mage. So again, this build is primarily for Simulacrum, for Rarity stacking as a solo player, mapping, Breachstones, not necessarily for Pinnacle bossing, such as, you know, the Trials of Sekhmet, Zarok, Arbiter of Ash, any boss that has very high resistances as a whole. Just something to keep in mind. We're running Lightning Spear, and we're running pretty standard Lightning Spear setup: Perpetual Charge, Fork, Volt, Martial Tempo, as well as Ambush. You could probably swap some of these out if you wanted. You might even be able to put something like Primal Armament in over Ambush. But Martial Tempo, I would definitely keep. The increased attack speed is really important. Helps get your Lightning Spears out a lot quicker. We're running Stormlance, and we are supporting Stormlance with Lightning Infusion, Conduction, Deliberation, Lightning Exposure, as well as Fire Exposure. These two exposures are really important because we're gaining a lot of damage as fire damage, and we have a lot of inherent lightning damage with Astral Menace and Hawa, so just something to keep in mind. We're running Conductivity as a buff, or a debuff for bosses and rares if you need it. We're running Heightened Curse, Cursed Ground, Ritualistic Curse, Persistence, Lightning Mastery. We're also running Herald of Thunder with Electrocute, Neural Overload, Innervate, Longshot, and Reach. Just maximum effectiveness Herald of Thunder. As you can see, my Spirit Gems aren't even level 21. Just something to keep in mind. We're running Barrage with Premeditation and Second Wind, as well as Cast on Critical with Sniper's Mark, Energy Retention, Impetus, and Inspiration. This is essentially just going to apply Sniper's Mark to every monster that we critically hit, and then make sure that we're able to reapply that as quickly as possible with the supports, which are essentially what Energy Retention and Impetus do, as well as Inspiration. We're running Wind Dancer, which is actually very important for this build, or most evasion builds as a whole. It's going to give you significantly increased evasion, as well as allow you a lot more survivability, because this will very frequently kill everything around you when it procs, and it will give you a lot of evasion as well. So every time you run into something like a Deli Cloud on the map or some Deli Fog, this will pretty much kill anything that overwhelms you in one hit, which is very nice. We're also running Combat Frenzy with Profusion. We're supporting Wind Dancer with Unbreakable, Blind, Wind Wave, Energy Barrier, and Maim as well. And if you have an unset ring, which I do right here, it could be a budget one, it could be any unset ring. You can also run Herald of Ash, and you can support it with Magnified Effect. So yeah, this is a very simple, very straightforward Lightning Spear build. Very, very budget-friendly beginner build, because honestly, you don't even 100% need a Regalia. There's a lot of ways you could min-max this build with little damage. You could drop some Rarity, get some resistances on the rings, and just run an Evasion Energy Shield chest piece. And as long as it has at least 700 Evasion and 250 Energy Shield, right, you're going to be chilling. You're going to be having a good time. In terms of upgrades to look for on this build compared to what I have, you could look for helmets with double Rarity or more Rarity, but you still want a really high ES roll. You can look for helmets with critical hit chance. You can look for helmets with high int rolls. Most of those cost 100 divines or more. It's very unfortunate. You could also look for a Regalia with a better armor, evasion, and energy shield roll, as well as, you know, more perfectly rolled suffixes, such as the all attributes. You could look for either a headhunter or a utility belt with an overcorruption on the left and right rings for additional rarity as well as resistances. Like I said, you can find that pretty easily with a 2-charm belt as well. The Hawa in this build is pretty much as good as it gets without overcorrupting the dex and the int for a fortune. And yeah, the boots as a whole, you could run rarity on them, which is what I have right here. You can run up to 25% rarity on your boots. And if you do acquire 50% rarity on all 3 of your rings, as well as on your helmet and 25% on your boots, you are looking at around 300%, if not more, rarity on the build as a whole. You could also get a Tangle Tongue with more crit chance and more fizz damage on it than mine. You definitely don't need this Tangle Tongue 100%. It does help out because we are primarily relying on Lightning Spear, and it's going to be hitting a ton of targets, so ideally you want to be critically hitting as much as possible. This is not like the Bleed Mage, like I said, where you prefer crit damage bonus through a double socket to scale the magnitude of your bleeding, because you don't necessarily care 100% about the crit because you're going to be critting so often anyways on single target. So yeah, just some ways to optimize the build and sort of push it forward. I'll put some clips in the video of the build as a whole, mapping, running daily content, running, pinnacle content, the effectiveness as a whole. But like I said, on average per map, I drop around 1 divine with this build. Just to get into a little bit of a mapping setup, this is the mapping setup that I use for this build. I try to stack quant on the maps as well as number of rare monsters if you're able to afford rare precursor tablets. You can also stack rarity if you want. It does help, but it's not 100% important. Main modifiers on this Atlas tree are the effect of precursor tablets as well as the effect of explicit waystones, because we are going to be running high quant, high rarity waystones. We'll be going into some pack size just for additional drops throughout the map, as well as 25% more effective prefix or suffix modifiers, as well as remnants of power for chance for double effective precursor tablets. Because we're stacking quant on our precursor tablets, we're going to be gaining 32% increased quant on our precursor tablets, which translates into, with like a 50% quant setup, that translates into an additional 15-16% quant, which is actually very significant. And then if we double that, we're looking at 120-130% quant per map, if not more, depending on what waystone you use. If you're running quant rarity or if you're just running rarity, you'll definitely notice a difference and notice significantly more drops if you run quant rarity waystones than if you run just rarity waystones, but they can be a bit more expensive or harder to craft. We're running some increased number of monster pack nodes, quantity of waystones, etc. We're kind of all over the place at the top of this passive tree. We drop down into the left over here into some increased magic pack size, increased magic monsters. You could also probably just take pack size instead of these 2 nodes. Magic monsters aren't that impactful, but they do drop chaos orbs and occasionally divines every now and then. We take rare monster being duplicated. This will just give us an additional free rare monster every map, as well as 20% increased number of rare monsters. So this as a whole will give us 2 to 3 minimum additional rare monsters, which is really where the loot is at, as well as unique monsters. Looking at the bottom right of this passive tree, this is really the most important part. Because we're stacking quant rarity on our waystones and our tablets and our maps, and we have a ton of rarity on our gear, we also want to spec into wisps. Wisps are really important. It's a league mechanic. League mechanics always have increased rarity and quant applied to them. I believe wisps, it's like 200% base rarity, 50% base quant, something along those lines. I'm unsure of the actual numbers. But we spec into Vivid Flow. The reason why we spec into Vivid Flow is that Vivid Flow, Vivid Spirits are Spirit of the Cat, Spirit of the Stag, and Spirit of the Wolf. So these golden charms, they have to drop from the type of spirit that you kill. So if you're farming golden charms and you're farming wisps, you definitely want to kill vivid spirits, because you'll get the most expensive rite of passages, which are the Spirit of the Cat or the Spirit of the Stag if you do drop one. You can also drop a Spirit of the Wolf, which is pretty worthless, but just something to keep in mind. You definitely don't want to spec into boars or bears or whatever rite of passages. They're just not that valuable, and you won't find as much loot as a whole. I mean, you'll find the same amount of loot, but you won't find as good of rite of passage drops. I've only dropped one of these this league, but if you're only going to be dropping one, you definitely want it to be one that's worth over 100 divines and not one that's worth 10 divines. We also spec in a Shining Trail. Shining Trail will give us additional rarity from wisps being possessed, possessing monsters in your maps, and it will also give wisps a chance to release on death. So those who don't know, wisps gain effectiveness, rarity, and quant. the more monsters they pass through. So if it attaches to a monster, dies, releases, there's a good chance it's going to pass through a significant amount of the map, and you will really, really be chilling. We also take Illumination is really important. It increases the area of effective Wisp so that it hits more monsters, and because we're running 150 deli, the Wisp is going to be touching a lot of monsters throughout the map, a lot. Definitely very important. Now, I will highlight that these Omens of the Hunt are also very, very important. The most rare wisps that you can encounter are the hair wisps as well as the fox wisps. These show up as orange in color, so vivid wisps show up as yellow in color. The hair and the fox wisps show up orange in color, and those are very valuable because they drop the fox talisman as well as the rabbit talisman. The fox and rabbit talismans are both around 100 divine right now due to price fixers and flippers buying out the entire market and relisting them. It is a pretty big issue because at most this 10% increased spirit jewel gives you, clarity, and having an additional 40% rarity on a 5-socket regalia isn't game-changing or game-breaking for a rarity bot. It's not worth the 600 or 700 divines you'd have to spend on it to get all 5. These were 1 divines the entire league. I'm not sure exactly what happened. Like I said, I'm pretty sure someone just bought everything on the market with several thousand divines once everyone stopped playing, and then relisted them for significant amounts of value. But every time that you see in a legendary wisp or a unique wisp, which will show up as orange, and you can always identify which wisp it is by looking at the monster. It'll tell you which wisp is affecting it. But you always want to use these Omens of the Hunt. These are around 6 chaos each, and these will guarantee that the wisp releases its spirit when the monster dies. So this is very, very important for an effective wisp strat, an effective wisp farm as a whole. So just keep that in mind. You definitely want to be using these Omens of the Hunt, and like I said, Shining Trail as well. You get the most value out of your wisps. They'll touch and interact with the most monsters on your map, and you'll be seeing a lot of additional quant rarity just through wisp juicing. Now, juicing wisps does slow down maps quite a bit because you have to follow the wisp around, and it has weird pathing sometimes, so just something to consider, that if you are running a wisp farm or running wisps as a whole, you probably will not be seeing that great of mapping outcomes in terms of completions per hour, but you will be seeing a lot of loot as a whole. To actually go into our Atlas or boss map Atlas setup, so we've went over our talent points as a whole. To actually go up our Atlas as a whole, this is very important right here. I do recommend juicing bosses with maps as well as map bosses being hunted. Juicing maps with bosses as well as map bosses being hunted by Esmiri spirits. So that's just something to consider and keep in mind. The reason why is that if we look here at our Atlas tree, we actually have this node right here, right? Organized Forces. Organized Forces causes non-irradiated areas with map bosses to have +1 to level. So you can put a Visions of Paradise on a map and then juice all the maps with bosses as well as breaches. You definitely want to put some breaches on the maps, like you don't want to run boss only. You don't want to run boss only for a few reasons. Breaches are just free additional loot on a map. But yeah, at the end of the day, we juice the maps with bosses because we can irradiate the area with Visions of Paradise. We can run each map twice, and both variations of the map are going to be tier 16, and you might even be able to run one of them as tier 17 or tier 18. We also take areas with map bosses have increased chance to contain corruption. If you are lost or confused on how to acquire your last 2 boss Atlas points, the easiest way to do that is to find a corrupted nexus zone, such as right here. You're looking for an area that says +1 to monster level. You have to irradiate the area, which you can actually do through the boss node right here that irradiates areas with map bosses. And you have to kill a map boss on a tier 16 map with +1 monster level that's also irradiated. So it has to be area level 82. And like I said, it has to be a corrupted nexus zone, right? It has to say +1 to monster level area on the map, on top of being irradiated, on top of having a boss, and you have to use a tier 16 waystone. I've had a few people ask me that question, so I will just cover that quickly. If you have any questions on that, you can join my Discord and ask me. But yeah, like I said, we're juicing these areas with bosses as well as breaches as well as irradiation, and we're primarily looking for quant, number of rare monsters, quant rarity. Anything along those lines will be very, very beneficial to us and will make us a good time. The other thing with juicing maps with bosses is that because we're running wisps and specking into wisps, we are essentially going to take Drawn to the Light, which causes areas with map bosses to contain an additional Ismiri spirit. Right, so this is really important because we're essentially guaranteed a wisp on every map with a boss. You can also put increased chances for wisps on your precursor tablets. I think it rolls up to 50%. You can stack that as a prefix on irradiated regular precursor tablets, and you can have a lot of wisps per map. Like I said, wisps gain value the more monsters they travel through, so there does get to be a point where you have too many wisps, right, which is just something to keep in mind. Because they're not really going to be touching anything before they kill it. But wisps can also affect multiple, or multiple wisps can affect one monster at one time. The other thing I have to say about map bosses being hunted by Ismiri spirits is that when you're running a lot of Quant and Rarity, one of the things that happens as a result is that the boss loot is actually phenomenal. I'll post a picture, but you tend to drop a lot of tier 0 uniques, divines, etc., even in solo play. So ideally, this strat would be best in terms of the Atlas setup with a 6-man group. But just in terms of running smaller groups, solo play, this is definitely still very effective, but it would be most effective to run in a 6-man group just for the additional Quant and Rarity. Judging by how many drops I get as a solo player, I can only imagine that this goes absolutely insane in a 6-man group with the additional Quant and Rarity being applied. But hopefully that makes sense to all of you guys. We're juicing maps, like I said, with breaches, bosses, additional wisp in area. It's hard to fit a ton of Quant on the maps, but you're aiming for around 40% Quant, as well as some Rarity and number of rare monsters. As you can see, this setup right here isn't really that good. I think this is a like 2-tower setup. I did have 3 towers right here where all the maps were 50% Rarity. And as you can see, the maps can be a little bit rippy with 150 deli. So that's just something to keep in mind. Even with 5,000 plus ES, the maps sometimes get a little bit rippy. You do die here and there. I think I actually ran these with the Temporalis build though. So you definitely occasionally die, but that's kind of the side effect of running really, really juiced maps, is that they're just occasionally very rippy. There's nothing you can do about it. It's the same in PoE1. Sometimes you just fall over and die, and you just go next. You load up the next map, and you forget about it, right? But yeah, Visions of Paradise to run each map twice. Juice them with bosses so that they're still tier 16, which does impact loot, as well as rare drops. And, you know, hunt the map bosses with Ismiri spirits, because it's literally just going to apply a ton of base Quant and Rarity to map bosses, which you have on the map anyways. You can also juice the area with quantity and rarity of items dropped by map bosses. Like if you had 100% Quant and 100% rarity of items dropped by map bosses, oh my gosh, you'd probably be dropping a mirror from every 10 bosses. I'm not even joking. With this strap. Now, unfortunately, it is kind of a relatively expensive setup to acquire all of that. But again, just something to keep in mind. And again, guys, hopefully you learned something from this video. Hopefully you're able to head into solo play and sort of acquire some good loot. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. And if you guys have any questions, definitely feel free to join the Discord, subscribe, leave a like, and comment down below what you guys would like to see next. I am working on a Temporalis build as well that I'll be covering. We've been doing a lot of testing with the Adorned, and we've also been running a lot of 6-man content recently, specifically simulacrums and breaches, and so we'll, you know, kind of go over some of those results in some future videos as well. Thanks for tuning in again, guys. Have a nice rest of your day, and yeah, stay blessed. After recording and editing the video as a whole, I did want to throw a little bit more information into the video just to kind of give you guys some additional ideas as well for this build. We tested some of these out on stream. The first idea is that when it comes to the Atlas tree, you can actually spec into Seeking or Covetous Shrines. Now, these by default give you 100% additional rarity for 2 minutes over the course of your map. These actually give 100% increased effect if you take Prayer of Guidance as well. So you'll actually be receiving 200% additional rarity when you do find one of these shrines. You'll be finding significantly more shrines, meaning acceleration shrines, buffs throughout the maps. It's going to make your mapping life significantly better. You'll be able to clear maps quicker on average. And as I said, hopefully, if you spec into Prayer of Guidance, you're going to hopefully be stacking that with Remnants of Power, getting double effective precursor tablets, as well as 200% rarity from shrines, 200% rarity from wisps, and you'll have around 1,000% rarity depending on your setup over the course of the map, or at least for 2 minutes during the map. So this is definitely an Atlas setup that you could go with as well. This one might be better than the first one mentioned in the video. And when it comes to the build as a whole, I did want to throw some additional information out there. You can get an Astromenace corrupted with Rarity for relatively cheap. I was looking on trade, and it's around 20 divines to get one corrupted with Rarity. But if you wanted to achieve or go towards, 500% Rarity for solo play, which is definitely achievable and possible, you would ideally look for a double Rarity T1 helmet for an additional, in this case, 35% Rarity. I believe I'm at 270 right now, so we'll just add this all up. 270 Rarity would go to around 305 with a better helmet. We could get an amulet with +3 projectiles, a critical damage or chance modifier on it, as well as flat and percent ES. Again, with double Rarity, +3 projectiles. And it could be a gold amulet base as well for around 65% total Rarity from an amulet. That would bring us from 305 to around 385, if not more. The reason why we gain more than 65% is because Mystic Attunement also affects amulets, so this is another option. So that would bring us close to 400% Rarity. We could also get gloves that had 25% Rarity on them as well, bringing us closer to 425% Rarity. And we could also put 5 sockets into our Regalia with Rarity to gain even more Rarity, pushing us closer towards 500% Rarity for a solo build. You could also get a better Ingenuity, 36, 36, 35, 35 for additional Rarity from these 2 rings is definitely an option. Now, if you decide to go with a +3 proj amulet or a different pair of gloves, you would definitely want triple damage gloves. You'd want double flat damage rings with the double Rarity, which can be very, very expensive. And you would want triple damage, crit damage bonus, or attack speed gloves, as well as a Rarity modifier on them. And then for the last modifier, like ideally, you'd want triple damage with crit damage bonus and Rarity. And for the last modifier, you could look for attack speed, just to speed yourself up throughout maps. You could also look for resistances or attributes depending on what you need for the build as a whole. You could also use a Regalia that doesn't have attributes but has global defenses is another option in terms of a Regalia. And like I said, if you had a large budget, you could definitely push this build towards 500% Rarity. But I did aim at making this build a little bit more budget friendly and a little bit lower entry, but if you wanted to push it to the high end, those would be the options in terms of what you could do. Look for double damage rings with double Rarity, a +3 proj crit, flat ES, max ES amulet. Now the reason why we're looking for a lot of ES on the amulet, you'd also be looking for ES gloves, is because we'd be losing a lot of ES. If you decide to go down this route, you'd most likely get rid of Black Site Training because we would no longer be stacking attributes at that point. You could probably get rid of Pure Power, and you could also spec out of Jack of all trades down here, as well as Polymathy. You'd spec out of pretty much all these nodes right here, come into Lightning Rod, Flash Storm, and you could come into some other nodes as well on the tree. I mean, there's a lot of options. You could also replace this against the darkness with a Time Loss Jewel that would be very similar to the Bleed Mage build, where you'd look for effective notable passives and radius, as well as crit chance, crit damage bonus, and, elemental damage maybe as the last modifier. You could maybe path into Heartstopper over here with first approach and, critical damage versus full life enemies just to really one-shot everything, at least throughout the map. It's not really going to help your bossing damage at all, but it will help your map clear and speed. You could also grab Harmonic Generator, General Electric. You could grab a bunch or really any of these nodes. The first nodes I'd probably path into, though, would be Deadly Force. Like I said, you'd have a bunch of spare points. I would still probably path into Patient Barrier. You could even path over here into Enhanced Barrier just for more ES and +1% max all res, but that would be a lot of wasted nodes. So there really are a lot of options for the talent tree and the build as a whole. You could really push this to 500% Rarity with even more damage on a very large budget. It's just not something that I could really personally afford, but if you're someone who can afford it and you wanted to push it even further, double your Rarity and maybe, see mirrors pretty often. I don't want to say pretty often, but you'd have a decent chance of seeing a mirror over the course of the league if you had a 500% Rarity setup and you pathed into, some more damage nodes and dropped the attributes. You could also drop the Regalia and drop the Rarity that you could get from it potentially, and get a Sleek Jacket with very high evasion and ES for more survivability. Part of the problem with specking out of attributes on this build is that you lose a lot of ES unless you just have an insane pair of gloves, an insane helmet, and an insane pair of boots, as well as a, insane Sleek Jacket. The value of this Varana is just really high, and the Varana loses a lot of effectiveness once you lose all of your strength. So that's just something to consider. Again, guys, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. If you were looking for a version of this build that does a little bit more bossing damage while still having rarity, you could definitely join the Discord. There's a member of the Discord, Daniel, huge shout out to him, who has a more optimized version of this build that also works for, Pinnacle content, Arbiter, Trials, King of the Mist, etc. It's not, like I said, a one-shot bleed mage build. It is just a very, very effective looting build for solo play without having to split out a rarity bot and, pay them to essentially tag along with you and maybe potentially be slowed down by another player. There's not much of a point in running multiple players in a group until you have 6 players, because that's when you're guaranteed quant rarity. Before 6 players, it's only a % chance for additional quant rarity. So just something to keep in mind. Again, guys, thanks for watching. If you guys want to help support the channel, definitely subscribe, leave a comment down below, like the video. I also have a donation link in the description video. I get asked a lot about donations. We are working towards upgrading the computer right now, and I'm also looking at getting a Streamlabs subscription so that I can stream on both Twitch and YouTube at the same time. And I would also like to potentially get some more stash tabs in the future. So if you guys wanted to support me at all, you could definitely, do so by clicking the donation link at the description of the video. Again, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much for supporting the channel. I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a blessed rest of your day. Have a good one.